Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 12, count 'em, 12 amazing classical clumps for adventurous listeners, old and new. In other words, some of this stuff is going to be familiar. Some of it's not going to be familiar, even if you're a connoisseur. But these are pieces of music or groups of pieces that came in a clump by composers who were clumpists. They tended to write things in heaps or piles or collections, and for that reason, they don't get quite as much play as they ought to, in my view. And there are just some amazing discoveries out there if you're willing to go clump and be a clumpist. Now, I love clumps. I mean, here we have a large clump of CDs. I like having things in groups. I like big boxes. I like to have collections of stuff because, quite frankly, if you like one of the things, if you like one of the objects or items in a clump, chances are you'll like the rest of the clump too. It's really very simple. And so I want to go through this list. This is a complete, random, total grab bag of stuff. But these are groups of things, and I don't want you to be afraid because there's going to be an investment of multiple discs. You can usually listen to one thing. You can declumpify and listen to one item by streaming or by something and decide if you like and if you want to get the whole batch. But you should know that there's a batch. That's all. I just want you to have the advantage, the choice of being able to become a clumper, like yours truly. So we begin with Bach, the 6 keyboard partitas. Now, what is a partita? You may not even know. A partita is like a suite. It's a group of pieces, usually assembled because they're all in the same key, and you have some sort of prelude or overture type opening, and then a batch of dances. The dances of the period were usually an allemande, courant, sarabande, and a gigue, and then a million other choices of things you could add in, making it as long and as complicated or as simple as you pleased. Now, Bach published very, very little music in his lifetime. Very little. But the partitas he took time to publish, which meant he polished them up, really shined them up. In fact, they were some of the pieces that gave weight to the accusation that he wrote his music out too much. He didn't leave anything for the performer to do. He wrote out his ornaments. He didn't actually. I mean, people still could ornament and add stuff, but the bottom line is they are extremely highly finished works by a composer who was, at the acme of compositional skill. Now, Bach's most famous keyboard work, of course, is the Goldberg Variations, which is fabulously, marvelously long. It's like an hour and 20 minutes if you do all the repeats and play it kind of slowly. And it's popular because it's a single thing. Of course, it's also a clump. It's a single thing consisting of 30 variations on that opening aria. But the partitas are 6 individual works, and they are big works. They last 25 minutes to a half hour each. Again, depending on how you handle repeats. They are harmonically fascinating. They're contrapuntally intricate. They are serious music for serious listeners, for people who really want to get their fangs into claws into marvelous, really amazing Baroque keyboard music. They are not Bach's easiest works. They require some listening, but they're amazing, absolutely amazing. And you can get them usually on 3 discs. They take up some space, maybe 2 discs if you squish. And, oh my goodness, they're wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And I'm not, as you know, an uncritical admirer of Bach. I find some of his music quite wearying. But the partitas are I just am aghast at the compositional skill that went into these pieces and the beauty of their themes and the clarity and constant inventiveness of their treatment. It's really, they're great. And so if you like the Goldberg Variations, for example, or the English suites or the French suites, give these a shot. They are in many respects, the summit of Bach's writing for keyboard. So after that, we go to Handel. And Handel, it has to be his 12 Concerti Grossi Opus 6. His 12 Concerti Grossi Opus 6 were an homage to Corelli, who also wrote a series of 12 Concerti Grossi Opus 6. And they are, like the Bach, an amazing exercise in the art of doing what they are. That is, they stand at the absolute summit of the kind of music that they purport to be. And the kind of music that these Concerti Grossi purport to be is a large string body opposed by a small string body with continuo, of course. That's some solos, a couple solo violins, a viola, two violins and a cello or a trio, something like that. A few solo strings against a larger body of strings. But these concerti can have any number of movements, anywhere from like 3 or 4 to like 7 or 8. And those movements can be run on to each other. They can be separate. They can be 30 seconds long. They can be several minutes long. Every single one of these 12 pieces is different. And they are an absolute essay in what a brilliant composer with a feeling for string sonority and texture and timbre could do with Baroque instruments, with the forms of the period. These Concerti Grossi are the Bach Partitas of Handel's output. And they are, again, extraordinary works. They're very popular. I mean, I don't need to go into, make a case for them. I would be preaching, to the converted. But if you are new, if you're a newcomer to classical music and you want to really get the essence of Baroque instrumental and orchestral music, you get the Bach Partitas, you get the Handel Concerti Grossi Opus 6, and everything else is a bonus from that point. Really, they're absolutely amazing. And next we come to a work that I just talked about. I just talked about a few days ago. But, if this is the year, 8716, then you might not have seen that earlier video, because by then I will have done, 14 billion videos, and who knows in what order they are. So, C.P.E. Bach's Hamburg Symphonies, also for strings and continuo, like the Handel Concerti Grossi, but oh my goodness, what a different style. Totally, totally different. C.P.E. Bach was writing in what he called the emotional style. That is, sudden and eruptive changes of mood and tempo and character, often within the same movement. These were symphonies that he wrote by commission of Baron van Swieten, who wrote the librettos for Haydn's oratorios, and he commissioned Mozart to do his arrangements of Handel's music, to update it, which didn't work very well, by the way. But van Swieten told C.P.E. Bach, do whatever you want. These were from the 1770s. Write anything you want, any way you want. Make it as complicated as you want. You have no limitations whatsoever. The result is a group of 6 symphonies in 3 movements each. They only last between like 9 and 12 minutes each. They're not terribly long, but they're packed full of ear-catching incident and brilliance. They're very difficult to play, incredibly characterful. One of the things that C.P.E. Bach was very careful to do when he wrote these things down, he was very, very detailed. Unlike a lot of composers of the day, extremely detailed. And these pieces have a harpsichord or forte piano, which I like better, continuo part. And that part is written out. In other words, C.P.E. Bach does not allow it to be improvised and made up as it goes. He's very careful to indicate when the harpsichord plays, when it doesn't play, when it should only play just the bass line, when it should play accompanying harmonies. So it's very much part of the sound, the sonority of the works in question. And it's very different from pieces where, especially today with these period instrument groups, where you've got these harpsichord people who lead the ensemble, and they turn everything into like harpsichord concertos, and they're banging away constantly, and it's just incredibly, incredibly irritating because it creates this monochrome impression. But you never get that impression with C.P.E. Bach. Never, ever. He's always conscious of the sound of the orchestra and what he can do to create maximum variety and contrast. So these pieces are absolutely amazing, and they're as good as unknown. They really are. And they're an incredible discovery that you will adore, I guarantee it. So look at my videos on these things so you can see which performances to get at classicstoday.com, or also written reviews at classicstoday.com, and videos here, because there's some marvelous performances of them as well. Next, Haydn. Yes, let's do our Haydn, shall we? The 6-string quartets, what a clump that is. Most Haydn quartets were written in groups of 6, although sometimes they were published in groups of 3, like Opus 71 and 74, but they're really a single group of 6. The 6-string quartets, Opus 64. Now, the Opus 64 string quartets were the last ones that Haydn wrote while he was still in Vienna, before he went to England, where he started writing quartets for larger forces for performance in concert halls, in the same concerts as symphonies and arias and other things like that. The later ones are bigger in size and in scope in some ways. These are still slightly more intimate, but full of invention. Unbelievable. This is the group that has the famous Lark Quartet. There's an expansiveness, an openness, often a pastoral quality about the music. They're still full of energy and full of Haydn's typical always surprising syntax. You never know where he's going or what he's going to do with them. But every single one of them is a masterpiece, and every single one of them deserves unalloyed, undivided attention, because there's so much great music here at these 6 works. 24 movements, 6 pieces. Usually they take a couple CDs worth, 2, sometimes 3 if you're stretching it. They're not terribly long. They run like 20 some odd minutes each. But wow, what an amazing collection of music. And, there's often a sense where if you get a clump, if you're in a clumping mood, you hear not just the contrast between works, but also this overall contrast between them within the group of 6. You hear all of the different moods and emotions and forms of expression and brilliant handling of the musical language that Haydn or any of these other composers built into the fact that they were writing a group. And this group it's one thing. And so they were concerned not only with the contrast and interest and variety within each work, but also between them. There's a larger scale force at work here. And a lot of people consider, works from the classical and Baroque periods as terribly small scale, as smaller things, because the average length of a movement, generally speaking, tended to be rather short. These things came in sort of sniglets. But when you've got a whole bunch of them and you're conceiving of them whole, you're careful about the way that they're arranged and the contrast between each one and the way that they play off each other. All of a sudden, you're privy to a much, much larger vision. And that's what you hear in these Haydn Opus 64 quartets and in all these other works. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's a justification for taking the clumpalicious approach. So after that, this is really cool. Charles Valentin Alkan, the French composer who's really only come into his own in the past couple of decades. He was as good as unknown before then. He was known only to very, very few piano wackos. But oh my goodness, this is the guy who made Liszt nervous. His technique was unbelievable, and his works matched the technique. I mean, just astonishingly so. And his largest masterpiece and biggest clump is his 12 Études in all the minor keys. I think it's Opus 39, something like that. I have it sitting here. Wait a minute, I could tell you. Because Opus 35, I think, is the Études in all the major keys. Yes, Opus 39. This is an unbelievable collection of piano pieces. You get an overture. This is all for solo piano, mind you. You get an overture for solo piano. You get a concerto for solo piano, a concerto for solo piano that's a good 50 minutes long. The opening movement alone is half an hour. You get a symphony for solo piano that's about 30 minutes long. Then you get a bunch of other studies, a velocity study, a rhythmic study, and a theme and variations called Aesop's Feast, where the piano is called upon to imitate all kinds of little animals and things, which is one of the wackiest pieces of music anybody ever wrote. This is an inexhaustible source of invention and surprise and bigness of vision. I mean, some of these pieces are huge, but when you put them all together on 3 or so discs, then you get bigness on top of bigness. They're amazing. And they were written in like the 1830s or 40s or something. I mean, they are so forward thinking, always with, Alkan always wrote with unbelievable formal control, no matter how big the movements get. You know, he was a master at classical form and of thinking in terms of large scale directional movement, you know, like this, it's going like that. I mean, it just makes me sweat talking about them. They are an amazing, amazing collection. And in order to get the most out of them, you really need to hear the whole thing. The symphony is got some, you know, separate performances. The concerto for solo piano is a legendary and iconic work in its own right. And it's often performed separately because, I mean, it's very hard to sit through 2.5 hours of this stuff. And it's, like I said, it's like 50 minutes long all by itself. It's a big, huge work. But you really need to have them all. You need to be able to experience the whole set to get the full impact of Alkan's sort of gargantuan and eccentric vision for the piano and his study in translating orchestral textures and concepts to the solo keyboard. You really need like extra hands or multiple fingers, you know, extra fingers growing out of your fingers to play all this stuff. It's unreal and fabulously interesting. Next, we're sticking with keyboard stuff. Mendelssohn, his 6 organ sonatas. I know you're going to say, oh God, organ, oh my God. And Mendelssohn, you know, Mendelssohn has this reputation for being kind of a Victorian dandy and kind of a wimp musically. But he wasn't at all. He was the greatest prodigy since Mozart. He was a fascinating genius. He was brilliant. I mean, he died quite young. He was only like 40 or something, whatever. But he was or 38 or 39. He was terribly young. He was great at everything. He was brilliant. He translated Greek and Latin. He could swim. He could play polo. He was great at athletics. He was just a polymath. And when it came to writing music, he was unbelievably self-critical. He also didn't publish too much. And at the time that Mendelssohn wrote his organ sonatas in the 1830s or so, or thereabouts, there were very few composers writing good organ music. The tradition of writing organ music was really in decline at this point. It was to be revived in the second half of the 19th century in the French organ works of Franck and Widor and that school in Vierne. But since Bach, organ music was in the doldrums. It really was. And Mendelssohn's organ sonatas stand alone as almost the only great organ pieces between Bach's stuff and the French guys. I mean, there were some other ones. There were some German composers. There was like, you know, what was his name? Reinecke, whatever his name was, who wrote a zillion organ pieces and things. And they're not bad. I'm not saying they're bad, but they were later also. They also came later. They came after Mendelssohn because Mendelssohn did his. And Mendelssohn's organ sonatas are just full of invention. I mean, the organ is tricky. It's tricky because organ music is entirely dependent for its success on the sound of the organ itself. And each organ is completely different from every other organ. And recording them in the space in which they're sitting, it's not like you can take them to a studio and do something with them. I mean, you're stuck in the church or wherever they are, and you have to put up with the acoustic, and you have to put up with all the quirks of the instrument, the noises it makes, and the echo. It's so difficult to get good organ recordings. It really is. But these are wonderful, wonderful works that are absolutely unique for what they are. And there are 6 of them. They come in a clump. So if you want a nice clump of organ music to get yourself interested, to get yourself, involved in organ music more generally, the best of it, then you've got to have the Mendelssohn organ sonatas. There's a very good performance of them, by the way, on Naxos, which is easy to get and inexpensive, in case you're wondering. It's quite well recorded. And you need to hear them because they're full of brilliant sonorities and novel sounds and wonderful exploitation of texture and just plain good tunes. And counterpoint, of course, because organs are great with like fugues, as we know from Bach. Wonderful pieces that deserve to be performed more often than they are. Now, after the organ sonatas, we're going to do something very familiar, insanely familiar. But again, I ask you to consider them whole, as a clump. And you may hear things that you haven't heard before. Chopin's 24 Preludes in all the major and minor keys. There they are. These are obviously inspired by Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, his 48 Preludes and Fugues in all the major and minor keys, twice. Chopin's are fascinating pieces because their preludes do nothing. Each of Bach's preludes is followed by a fugue. Chopin's preludes are just preludes. They introduce infinity. They introduce whatever you think should come after. They are little gems of romantic, emotional anticipation of something to come. But if you play all 24 together, and some of them are very short, less than a minute long, so the entire set only lasts about 40 minutes. You can listen to it all at a sitting. You're supposed to. That didn't stop people in the 19th century and later from only playing selections from the preludes. And there are still, some of them are much more famous than others. But they are exquisite, beautiful pieces. Oh my God. And I just can't stand hearing them separately. I always want to hear what's coming next. It's a fascinating exercise, actually, because sonata music in sonata form is designed to create a feeling of forward momentum and a need for resolution that propels you and the listener and keeps your ear, intrigued, guessing what's going to come next. And somehow, God knows how, Chopin manages to do this by simple contrast of length, of speed, of harmony, of texture. I don't know how he does it, but however he does it, this clump of pieces, these 24 pieces, are a whole, an absolutely indivisible whole that are just amazing to experience as such. And so I would ask you, even if you're very, very familiar with these pieces, to think about them in that sense. And see if at your next listening encounter with them, you don't hear some sort of mysterious conversation betwixt and between the various numbers, as they all somehow belong together as a family. Really an astonishing work of genius. And they have to be in any major group of important classical clumps. How could you have a clump collection without Chopin's Preludes? Possible. After Chopin's Preludes, well, here's something a little different. Dvořák's 10 Legends for orchestra. They exist in two forms, the Legends, as work for piano for hands and as an orchestral suite. And it's the orchestral ones you want to hear because Dvořák was an unbelievably gifted orchestrator. His sounds are wonderful. And he wrote these pieces for small orchestra, chamber orchestra, a small orchestra with no heavy instruments, no trombones or tubas or things like that, but a harp and triangle here and there, and a few little extras and some exotica. These are virtually unknown works by Dvořák, but it's a very serious suite of pieces. There's 10 of them. They're called Legends. Like Chopin's Preludes, we don't know what the Legends are about. They last about 50 minutes, the whole set, 50 minutes to an hour. If you wanted to play all 10 of them, you can do them in groups of 5. You don't have to listen to all 10, but you can listen to them however you want to listen to them. Who am I to tell you how to listen to them? Like everything Dvořák wrote, they are so colorful. They're so full of beautiful tunes. Some of them make reference to other Dvořák works, which makes things kind of interesting. For example, there's one that quotes the slow movement of his Third Symphony, which at the time he wrote this was as good as unknown. Nobody was paying any attention to it because it was early and Dvořák had no plans to revive it, although he did like once later in his career. But the Legends are beautiful, beautiful, beautiful works. So lovely and so expressive and delicate. And I'm not sure what's legendary about them, to be honest. You would have to tell me. But they have a basic, essential beauty, like so much that Dvořák wrote, that you feel, couldn't be anything else or any other way. They're lovely, lovely works. Give them a listen. I mean, really give them a listen. You'll be so happy you did. So after Dvořák, we come to a popular clump, Smetana's Vlást. Now, Smetana's Vlást, everyone knows the Moldau, the second one, also called Vltava, which is the name of the river, and it's a river. It's a river. It has a major tune that became Hatikva, the Israeli national anthem. They supposedly had a common root in some sort of Czech folk thing or song of some kind. But the complete cycle of 6 tone poems is very rarely played outside of Czechoslovakia. I've only seen it done by the Czech Philharmonic on tour. Of course, they do it. I don't see it played very often by non-Czech ensembles or ensembles that don't have Czech conductors. So I recommend, again, that aside from Vltava, which is number 2 in the list of 6, there's 6 symphonic poems, the last 2 of which are joined together, that you listen to the whole thing, which takes about an hour and 10 minutes. It's an amazing piece of music. You've got the beginning, which is Vingt Regards, the fortress that overlooks Prague, and then you've got the river, and then you've got Sharka, who's an Amazon who winds up killing her lover, and there's a whole massacre thing involved with a love scene that's incredibly sexy. And then there's From Bohemia's Woods and Fields, which is a nature poem, and finally Tabor and Blanik, which are tone poems about the great Hussite wars of the Protestant Reformation in Czechoslovakia. They're full of, militant battle type stuff. And they use some wonderful chorale themes and whatnot. They're not as popular as the last 2 because they're joined together and they don't really work outside the complete cycle. So you really have to hear the whole thing. You have to get a clump. So listen to the whole thing. Enjoy your clump. And we're going to do 2 more batches of tone poems, actually. Next, Charles Koechlin, the crazy French guy who was in love with silent movies and had a beard that came down to his knees and was absolutely nuts. I mean, he was absolutely nuts. And he did a series of pieces based on Kipling's The Jungle Book. 4 tone poems, big, interesting tone poems, very different from one another. There's the spring running, the cours de printemps in French, the spring running, and Les Bandarlog, the troop of monkeys, and the meditation of Purit Bagan or something, whatever it's called. It's the law of the jungle. And every one of these pieces is scored for a different type of forces. It uses different musical styles, and it's spacey music. It doesn't sound like anybody else you've ever heard in your life. He also wrote 3 orchestral songs based on The Jungle Book, which are beyond gorgeous. Oh my God, they're so beautiful. This is one of those pieces you probably don't know very well and haven't heard, and you'll be enchanted if you do. You're not going to get it for the tunes. You get it for the textures, for the sonorities, for the magical sounds that he evokes in these pieces, the stillness, the big, crazy, just astonishing. And after Koechlin, good old Charles Ives, his New England Holidays Symphony. Now, the New England Holidays Symphony is a clump of 4 tone poems. You can play them all separately. Most of them get played separately, but one of them, the last of them, Thanksgiving, you only get to hear usually within the context of the 4 because it ends with a big chorus. So you wait for the chorus to come in at the end. They sing a hymn that I used to sing all the time when I used to do Christmas concerts with my high school glee club at Trinity Church on the Green in New Haven. It's God beneath thy guiding hand, our exiled fathers crossed the sea, and as they trod the wintry strand, with prayer and psalm they worship thee. Then there's like 12,000 other verses. That's in Thanksgiving. But you also get the 4th of July, which is one of Ives' most insane pieces with fireworks going off, this huge explosion at the end, and Washington's birthday and Decoration Day, which is Memorial Day, where you lay wreaths on the graves of veterans and then play a march to go home. They're fascinating pieces, wonderful pieces, and delicious. Oh, that's the door going off. And delicious if you listen to them all in a clump. I mean, they're just amazing. And last but not least, the last clump, Messiaen, Vingt Regards sur l'Enfant Jésus. We're back to keyboard music. 20 glances at the baby Jesus. I have no idea what Messiaen is talking about, not being Catholic myself, and I have very, very good friends who are very, very Catholic, and they have no idea what Messiaen is talking about. This is an extraordinary cycle of 20 piano pieces, each one based on some aspect of contemplation of the baby Jesus, in Messiaen's typical style, which is with interesting Hindu rhythms and bird song twittering around and strange harmonies, and it's a 20-piece clump. And all I can tell you is that if by this point you've decided that you are a clumpist, then you're going to want to have Vingt Regards, because it's one of the great 20th century works for keyboard, one of Messiaen's masterpieces. It's not as difficult to listen to as some of his later music. I mean, it has some sort of, contact with music that may strike you as immediately expressive and evocative of certain things, of nature, of all kinds of other things. I think it's brilliant and just fun to listen to. I really do. And you have to give it some time to sink in and familiarize yourself with it. But you'll have a whole clump. You'll get all 20 glances, and you can play with them at your leisure. So there you have it, my friends. 20 or 12 amazing classical clumps. God knows there are hundreds, thousands more that we could do classical clumps forever. And if you like classical clumps, well, maybe we'll do some more. It's entirely up to you. But in the meantime, this is a lot of music. These 12 clumps are going to keep you busy for like years. So there's no rush, there's no hurry, but there's a lot to be gained by taking your music in clumps. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.